Good afternoon, YouTube. So this is going to be a live session all about the 10 lessons that we have learnt from using the WordPress block editor. We've been using it for a while on a few projects, and so I thought I would do a video and show you what we've learnt about it. Now, if you were attending the WordPress Birmingham meetup this week, you will have seen this talk, but I wanted to put it on the YouTube channel and do it again so everyone can see it on the sort of history as well. Before we do that, obviously, if you want to listen to more of Highrise talking about WordPress and so forth, then please consider subscribing to the Highrise Digital channel. You should find a button at just underneath this video where you can subscribe if you've not already done so. Thanks to all those who have. And if you like this video, then consider hitting that like button. Lets us know that we're sort of on the right track. So I'm going to flip across and present my slides. If I can work out how to drive this software, bear with me a second. Hopefully you should now be seeing my slides and you should see me in the bottom corner of the screen. So, lessons learned from building WordPress sites with the block editor. As I mentioned, we have been building at the last, I think it's 3 projects, possibly 4, with the WordPress block editor. Traditionally, we used an advanced custom fields approach with like flexible content, and we've moved across to using the block editor, keeping it as native WordPress as we can. I think that's a good sort of principle to have when you're building WordPress websites. And there have been some great successes with it. There has been some quirky little things that have annoyed us, and overall, though, it's been a success. And we're actually just coming to the end of a pretty large build that is also using the block editor, which has been pretty successful. So let's dig in to the block editor and look at some things about it. So first of all, it's just to say that this is a big change. If you're a developer, if you're an agency, if you're a freelancer that is building WordPress websites for clients, this is a big change in the way in which you do this. Historically, you might have approached it in a sort of what I would sort of call a template-based design pattern. So you are designing a homepage, you're designing a blog post, you're designing a blog archive page, an about page, etc., etc. Well, when we use blocks in WordPress, we're essentially not necessarily doing away with those, but we're allowing clients to build pages based on the different blocks themselves. So they can build any page they want because they've got this block-based system where they can create a page based on different blocks. So we have to make sure that all of our blocks work together really well all the time, and that can be a big challenge. So it's less about designing templates, and it's more about designing those blocks and making them work together with each other. Now, that said, clients tend to want to see their website, so I wouldn't recommend not providing them with a homepage design, with that about page design and blog archive, etc. They still want to see that, but what you're essentially doing is building the components of those templates, and you're putting them together and saying, hey, this is what this page could look like based on these different blocks, but it is flexible type thing. So it is a big change, but try not to be too scared about it because we have found it to be a positive change, in the long run. So this talk, as I mentioned, is going to talk about 10 lessons that we have learned. Now, these are in no particular order, like the most important first and last. It's not particular that order. They're just 10 lessons that we've come up with that we've kind of learnt. So let's get stuck into what they are, and let's give you some more information about them. So, lesson number 1. When the block editor came out, we were all told we needed to learn JavaScript. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't learn JavaScript. Why not? It's a great language. It does lots of things. But we didn't really know JavaScript. We use JavaScript, but we would not consider ourselves anywhere close to an expert in this. And the block editor is built in JavaScript, and that posed a problem and a big worry as an agency. How are we going to build sites with the block editor when we don't know JavaScript? Well, the first lesson we found out is that you actually need far less JavaScript knowledge than you think. So you don't need to know React. You don't need to know how to build a block in JavaScript. You really don't need as much as you think. You do need some, you need a little bit of knowledge, but if you've used jQuery in your themes to do various things, you've probably got enough knowledge to get some decent functionality into the block editor. You don't need to use build tools in JavaScript, such as like Webpack, to sort of like compile code together and things. They're quite complicated if you've never done them before. You don't actually need that, so don't worry about that. And all you need to actually get to be successful really is to hook in one JavaScript file into the editor. So when WordPress loads the block editor when you're editing a post or a page, it also loads your JavaScript file, and the stuff that you do in that file gets run so that WordPress can do the stuff that you want it to do. And in that file, we're just writing native JavaScript. There's nothing special about it. We don't have to write it in a specific format. I know I don't really understand them, but there's ES5 and ES6 and all these weird variants, but none of that is actually sort of like necessary. So how do we hook in our JavaScript file to the block editor? Well, it's very simple. We use an action called enqueue block editor assets. You can see that at the bottom line there. And we're hooking in a function called, in this case, HD Gutenberg scripts. You can call that whatever you like. And inside that function, we are enqueuing a script. This is just the WordPress WP-enqueue script function, which allows us to enqueue scripts in WordPress. And we've given it a name, hd_editor, and then we've passed it the location of that, which is in our assets.js, and it's called editor.js. Now, this requires some dependencies, and I got to confess I don't fully understand what those libraries are doing, but they require the WP blocks JavaScript library or file and the WP DOM library or file, because you're probably going to want to use the stuff that's in there in your editor file. So it needs to have loaded before your editor file actually gets picked up. The last couple of lines there is just a bit of caching with the timestamp on the version of the file, and the true at the end means put it in the footer rather than in the head of the page. So doing that will get you an editor.js file added, and you should be good to go. By the way, I didn't mention, if you want to add some questions during this, then please feel free to pop them in the chat, and I will try and get to them as and when I can. I've got the comments sort of appearing on the screen, so I should be able to get to those as I see them. So that's got our editor.js file enqueued. So we don't need as much JavaScript as we think. A quick drink. Now, this next one, number 2, block styles are awesome. Now, this was something that we found quite early on, actually, and it was a bit of a game changer in terms of what we could do. So you might have a design and you have got several blocks that they kind of are the same thing. You know, they've got the same data in them. They've all got a heading and a paragraph and a button and maybe an image, you know, like a little card that you might see. But they're all slightly different. So they all look slightly different in terms of design. One might have a background colour, one might have a heading that's larger, one might have a different button style. You get the idea. So to make these changes without having to sort of build multiple different types of blocks for those things, we can use block styles. Now, when you're editing a post and you're clicking on a block, some of the blocks have block styles. You'll see them on the right-hand side. They're little square buttons with a name. And essentially all they do is they add a class to the block. So they don't change any markup in the block at all. It's simply a user interface for the user to be able to apply a class, rather than having to type the name of a class, which they would need to know the name of, into a advanced sort of classed section. They've got a bit of a section for that. So it's a great way of adding like different styles to blocks to make them look slightly different. A very popular one that we get is we see a lot of designs that have this text media block. And that's a native core block in WordPress where you have an image on the left-hand side or the right, and then you have some text on the other side. Usually that text can be like a heading, a paragraph, and a button. It's like a call to action type thing. And quite often we see that pattern in the designs, but with variations and different styles. And this is a great way to use the same block, but provide those different styles, because you can apply a class to that block very straightforward for the user, and then you can style that block slightly differently. which has been super useful when we've been building some of the sites we've had. Another example that we had recently was we had a list block, and they had different types of lists. So we had in the design, there was a bullet point list. There was a list with ticks where the bullet point was, and then there was one that didn't have any bullet points and had like an underline between each of the list items. Not an underline, like a bottom border. And this was a great way of allowing the user to just use a list block and then say, well, what style do you want it? Do you want a tick list? Do you want a bulleted list? Etc. And it really works very well. So, Mark, how do we add a block style? So in our editor.js file, this is how you would add a block style. So we call this function, I think it's a function in JavaScript, maybe not, but wp.blocks.register block style. It kind of does what it says on the tin, registers a block style with WordPress. And then we're going to tell WordPress which block we want to add that style to. Now, this could be a custom block that you built, or it obviously could be a core block. And in this case, this example is where we're going to add it to the columns block. So it's core/columns. All of the core blocks are prefixed with core/. So we're applying it to that block, and then we pass an array of the different styles that we want. So you see the first one here is called default, which means it doesn't have a style. Its label is default, so that's what the user sees in the back end under that little button that says apply this style. And the is default flag is true because it means that that's the one that's applied if no one is if one isn't selected. And the name part of that is just the class that gets added. So in this instance, we've got the second one here is a background grey class, and the label is saying to the user create a grey background. The reason why we added this one because we wanted a way to get the columns, each column with a grey background, and it equalised the height of each column. So in the case, if they choose grey background, that particular columns block will have a class of is-style-grey-background. And then you can use that in your CSS in order to be able to style that particular block differently. And possibly use it in JavaScript as well to target that block if it's got that style so that you can do some things with JavaScript. So as you can see, nice and straightforward JavaScript. It's not particularly complicated, not too scary, even for a JavaScript novice like me. Let's move on to number 3. So this is kind of a principle that I think really will stand you well, and that is use the core blocks as much as possible. There are loads of them. And actually, for most of what you want to build, you probably can use core blocks. Now, there are going to be times where you can't quite get what you need, and you might have to build a custom block, and I can show you some examples where we've had to do that. But try and use the core blocks as much as possible, building together blocks to make look like the designs. And using a group block can be very handy here. So a group block can have a background color, for example. So if you've got like a call to action with heading, paragraph, and button, which I mentioned before, if you put that inside a group block, you can then apply a style to that group, perhaps in the way we've just described, and you can also provide background colors and things to sit on there. So they can work really well. So try as much as you can to use those core blocks. It's better future compatibility, and it just makes sense. We're writing less code, so that's a good thing. Number 4, hard one to explain if you've not seen them, but this is inner blocks for the win. So inner blocks are excellent. And let me try and explain what an inner block is. So I'm going to do this by showing you this image, which is actually on Bill Erickson's blog. I don't know if you've not ever seen or read Bill Erickson's blog. It's an excellent resource for WordPress things, particularly the block editor. There's a whole section on there about the block editor and blogs about his experiences and things that he's done with the block editor. And I would highly recommend you go and have a look with it. The URL of this particular article is at the top of this slide. So this is a block that is an about person block. So, showing a specific person on the about page or somewhere else, I suppose. And this particular block has an image on the right-hand side and then some information on the left-hand side. Now, the only field here that is sort of set that the user has to enter is this image on the right-hand side. So we're saying to the user, look, you need to put an image in because it's the about person, and then they can put that image on the right-hand side. But on the left-hand side, we're using this function or feature of WordPress block editor called inner blocks. And what that means is that the user can now add on that left-hand side any of the blocks in WordPress. So obviously they might want a title in there, but if they wanted to put an image in there, if they wanted to put a list in there, a link in there, anything, a button in there that links out to somewhere, they can do. So that's done with inner blocks. And it means that we're using core blocks to add that particular thing. We're not using custom blocks in that case. So back to point number 3 where I said use core blocks as much as you can. So that's a good example here. And this social icons block at the bottom is a custom block that was built. Here is an example that we've been working on. So this is an accordion row. Excuse me. Now, what we've done here is built an accordion, a block called an accordion row block, and the user adds multiple of those blocks to create an accordion together. But what we've done is we've provided the user with a box to type in the title of the accordion row. So where it says title of the row, a second row title. So if this was like an FAQs, that would be the question. And then when the box expands, when the accordion expands, this particular place where another block here and the picture is just inner blocks. So here they're not restricted as to what they can add in here. They can add any blocks into that area. So they could add columns in there, they could add images, videos, lists, start doing a layout in there if they wanted to, and that makes sense for them. So inner blocks really do work well, which is something to look at. Now, I know probably someone's going to be screaming at me, well, Mark, I don't want them to have all that control when I build a block. I want them to have only certain blocks in there. Well, you can do that as well. You can restrict the blocks that are available in an inner blocks area by passing an array of those blocks. And you can also only allow certain blocks, like I said, but you can have a template of blocks. So you could say, here's when they add the block, the inner blocks area is pre-populated with a template that they then just go and fill in. So it's pretty flexible, well worth having a look at inner blocks. Number 5, take advantage of block patterns. Again, this links back to my point about using the core blocks as much as possible. Now, there's going to be times where you come across a design and you look at the design and you could build it with core blocks. You don't need a custom block. And I'm going to use the example again of a call to action card. Background color, heading, paragraph, and then some other blocks, maybe a button at the bottom like that. In fact, if we just skip forward a few slides, I think I've got a picture of it and I'll come back to those. There we go. So this is a great example of a call to action card. Now, if you look at it, we can make that with core blocks. We don't need custom blocks to be able to make that. So as you can see, I can just use an image block. I can use a heading block. Then I could perhaps use a paragraph block and then a button. And the grey background could be a group block. So I don't actually need custom blocks here. But what I do want to do is I don't want the user to have to worry about adding those blocks in the right order, adding the group block and making sure that the correct colours applied to it, etc. So what we can do is create a block pattern, which is basically a pre-selected set of blocks that fit together in a pattern and can be dropped on the page as one. So let's just go back to my little code examples here. Whoops, where are we? There we go. So how do we create a block pattern? The first thing you need to do is register a block pattern category. Now, forgive me if this is not relevant anymore, but when we built this project, we came across a little issue where it wouldn't add our block pattern until we actually added a category for it to go into, which we thought was a little strange, but it works. So here we're hooking into the WordPress init action with a function. We're checking whether block patterns are allowed, essentially, with that if class exists. And then we're registering a pattern category called Highrise Digital and passing a label to that, which is just a label of that you see in the back end. And then once we've done that, we can then start to actually create our block pattern. Now, this is where it gets Slightly complicated, so I'll try my best to explain it for you. So again, we're doing the same thing. We're hooking into the init action and we're registering our block pattern using the register block pattern function in WordPress. Now this is all PHP, it's not JavaScript. You can just do this as normal in PHP. And then what we're doing here is we are passing the name of our pattern, and we always prefix the name. Here we've prefixed it with HD / and then it's called Facebook like group. And then we're giving it a title and a description so the user knows what it's called and what it's used for. Now, the content element of this particular one, the way you create a block pattern is you actually go into the editor in WordPress and you create the blocks as you would want them to be created. So in this case, I'd add a group block, I'd set the background color to grey, I'd then add an image block, I'd put the correct image in, I'd then add the title, the paragraph and the button. Now, if you want to add that with sort of placeholder text, that's fine, and then the user will remove that and change it. But it might be that you want set text. It's up to you. Once you've done that, if you click on the toolbar in the block editor on the top right-hand side, it's the 3 dots. You can then view the code behind that, and it will look something like this on the screen. So the exclamation mark -- WP group, blah, blah, blah. And what you need to do is copy that, and then you need to escape it. As I said, it gets a little bit complicated. And the best way to escape it is to use an escaping tool, which I found, and I'll just flip through the slides. This URL basically gives you a box to type it in, and then it gives you the stuff to copy and paste. And then you want to paste that into your content area on this particular page. And that will give you, and sorry, on the last slide, last bit is just setting the category that we created. And that will give you a block pattern that the user can then add to a page. And block patterns appear with the blue plus symbol in the top left of the editor. And then you can choose the patterns and then they'll be listed in there. Now, there are some core patterns that come with WordPress, which you may or may not want to use, or you can get rid of those as well. So that's just something to think about. Block patterns, really good. No need to create custom blocks when we can build it with a block pattern. Now, things I'd like to see on block patterns is I'd love to be able to lock them to say, you can change the content of the blocks in this pattern, but you can't add other blocks to the pattern or change the blocks. And I can't find how to do that. If you can do that, then I apologise, but I couldn't find how to do that. So if anyone knows how to do that, then please let me know. Let's move on to number 6. I just have to have a quick drink. So, this one's dead simple. Just set up some custom colour palettes. So lots of places in WordPress, I'm thinking like the paragraph block, the group block, it has background and text colour options. And you can set a custom colour palette so that the user doesn't have to choose from, like in pasting in their own hex code, for example. They can just click a colour that is from their brand colours. So how do we do that? We can... I'll just show you first of all what that looks like. So here's what I'm talking about. So the text colour is at the top, and you can see we've put in the brand colour palette for this particular project. That's the red, blue, black, and then the greys and white. So all they need to do is click on one of those rather than type it in the colour code. They can also click custom colour if they desperately want to do that, but obviously we'd rather they didn't. So how do we actually add that to WordPress? Well, again, this is just PHP. It's not actually JavaScript. And we use the WordPress function called add theme support. There's lots of different things you can add theme support for, and the editor color palette is one of them. And you can see we're passing an array of colors, and each one of these color items is an array itself. The name here is the brand navy, which is what the user would see when they hover over those color palettes. The colour at the bottom is the colour that little circle is actually given. And then the slug here is the class name that gets generated. So don't forget that this isn't going to be that colour on the front end until you've actually styled it using this class. So in this instance, if this was for the text colour, if the person clicked brand navy in this instance, a class would be applied to this block called has-brand-navy-colour. So it's has, then the slug, then dash colour. And if it was a background colour, it'd be the same. It'd be has-brand-navy-background-colour. If you can understand that. So that's how you create a colour palette. And you can have as many of these as you want. So you can put your brand colours in, and that means that they can simply pick from a brand colour rather than having to type in the colour code themselves with risking getting it wrong. Number 7, short and sweet. If you do need to build custom blocks, and we have built custom blocks, a number of custom blocks on sites. The accordion row was an example of one that I showed you before. We've built content listing blocks that allow users to select content from the site and then display it with sort of Ajax load more features and stuff like that. For us, just use advanced custom fields. It has a new block-based system in it where you can use advanced custom fields to create blocks. It's really straightforward to use. There's probably a whole other talk in how to do that, but basically, yeah, that's easy. There's no need to build them with native JavaScript unless you know what you're doing, which is great. Number 8, free to go. So, styling the editor is hard. Now, one of the concepts of the block-based editor was that the user can edit the content and they see what it looks like in the editor. So the idea is it's a real true what you see is what you get WYSIWYG experience, and we don't, the concept here or the theory is that we don't really have to flip from the front to the back to see the changes because the editor is going to look exactly the same as the front end. But that's hard. That's really hard, and we found this is a big problem and something that's not easy to solve. Now, the reason for this is that the markup in the editor tends to be different slightly to the markup on the front end. So the obvious choice is to enqueue your front end styles in the back end. But what happens is that kind of sometimes you accidentally start styling the block editor's UI. So, for example, like checkboxes won't look right and drop downs will look like the front. It starts getting a little bit strange. Also, elements tend not to have like unique classes or IDs to identify them in the back end. So even if your front end styles have sort of overridden something, it's hard to target that to then reset it, which is quite difficult to do. And it has just proved a little bit of a pain in terms of editing the styles for the editor or styling the editor. So if anyone's got any tips on that, then we're welcome to listen to them, because it seems like a problem that shouldn't be this difficult and actually has been. I think the approach we're taking is enqueue the front end assets and then like fix the problems. Whereas you could just not enqueue those and then style what's there, but then you're kind of writing two style sheets for the back and the front. I don't know, that just doesn't seem right. So, tricky one, and something that really could be improved, I think. And just to also saying this, documentation on the block editor is getting better, but it's not there. It's not easy to find the stuff you're looking for. One of the real benefits of like WordPress when I started was that you could Google it, or you could look on the codex or the developer docs, and you'd find the answer to like pretty much everything you look for. It's not like that at the moment with the block editor, and stuff is difficult to find. There's far fewer articles around it because it's new, and there's less people that are probably confident with it, like me. So documentation is sometimes hard to find. So just bear with it on that one and think about it. Number 9. So this is a very interesting one. Let me just put that slide across. So decide whether you are going to support all of the core blocks. Now, there are lots of core blocks out there, and it might be that you just don't need them in your design. Now, if you choose to support all the core blocks, that means that any content author or editor will be able to add a block to the page. So what does that mean? Well, it means you need to style it. It means it needs to look right with any combination of other blocks, and that can get quite complicated. So our approach would be not to support all the core blocks, would be to support the ones that you think are going to be needed. Now, there's 2 ways to do that. You can do a blacklist approach, which means that you are saying don't allow these blocks, or you can do a whitelist approach, which means that you I'll only allow these blocks. Our approach would be the latter, because that means that if WordPress, so if you've got a list and you say, we are only supporting these particular blocks, and if the block in question is not in that list, then it's not allowed to be used and it never shows in WordPress. The benefit to that, I'll come through this code in a second, the benefit to that is that if WordPress or a plugin or something adds a new block in the future, it won't automatically be added to this site and there for the user to add. Because obviously if they add it and it's not styled and it doesn't work properly, then it's going to break things. So in this instance, even if a new block gets added to WordPress, it's not going to be available to the user until you've tested it, you've styled it, etc., etc. So this is the code that you can use to take that approach of a set list of blocks that you're allowing. We're hooking a function into the filter called allowed block types, which essentially is an array of the blocks that are allowed. And what we're doing at the start of that is we're setting up an array of blocks that we allow. I've just got core/image as an example. There's actually a long list in our function, but obviously I wanted to fit this on the screen. We've also put in the gravity forms block in this particular instance. So you could add blocks from other plugins. And then if you're using advanced custom fields, custom blocks, it comes with a handy function called ACF get block types, which basically gets all of the ones that have been registered with advanced custom fields, which means we can just loop through each one of those and add it to the list, and we don't need to add them individually. So that is how you would take the approach of having a list of blocks which you're allowing rather than having a list of blocks which you are disallowing, which I think is the best approach. Number 10, last one, use a just-in-time CSS approach. Now, this is something we've built in this last project we were doing. We had some really good success with it. And the idea behind this is that instead of traditionally having like one style sheet in the head with all your styles for all your blocks, we're experimenting with a just-in-time CSS approach, which basically means that just before a block is rendered on the page, let's load the style straight above it. And that is beneficial for a couple of reasons. It prevents too many render blocking CSS files, and it only delivers the CSS when that block is actually on the page. So that means that it's going to be much more efficient in that particular respect. As I said, it's still in its infancy and it's still something we're working on, but we've had some good work with it and some good results with it as well. Also, just to note, I'm pretty sure that this is coming in core for the core blocks. If you look at the roadmap and you look at some of the comments in the default theme and other things, you can see that this is going to happen for the core blocks as well. So for example, before an image block, there's going to be an image CSS file that is going to be loaded just before that block. And they've even got some cool stuff in there, basically whereby it says, if that CSS file is smaller than a certain file size, then it's probably not worth linking out to a CSS file. It's probably better to inline the CSS above it in like a style element. So lots of cool stuff coming with that. And we've also done it with template parts as well. So like before the header's loaded, you get the header CSS. Before the footer's loaded, you get the footer CSS and that sort of thing. Really interesting stuff and something to certainly watch out for. We'll be putting some more content out around that in the future. So before we finish, I just thought I'd show you some of the things that I have yet to look into with the block editor, but is certainly worth you looking into if you're interested in it. And that is, the first one is block variations. You'll know what a variation is if you look at the columns block. When you add a columns block to WordPress, the first screen that you're presented with was to pick a variation. How many columns you want and what layout is it? 50-50, 70-30, 33-33-33. That is a block variation. So it's that first screen. So you add a block and then you're choosing the variation. Could be useful for custom blocks if you've got the right sort of scenario. We've not worked with block templates, and what I mean by that is that when you add a specific post type, a new post in a post type, you can preset the blocks that are on the page. You can lock those blocks as well so they can't be moved around and that sort of thing. Tied in with that is we've not really worked with saving block data as post meta. So for example, if you had an event post type, you could preset the blocks that they've got to fill in but you would probably want like the date of the event and the time as saved as metadata so that you can query it and use it in other things. You can do that with Gutenberg, with the block editor. Not something we've looked into. We've not built native JavaScript blocks. We've always used advanced custom fields, as I mentioned. And something we've not really to look into, although I did have a sneak peek of it, was full site editing coming soon. Obviously, that's the biggie. I got as far as installing the theme and having a little play, but really nothing further than that. So that is the 10 lessons that we've learnt about the block editor. Let's bear with me and I'll put me back on the screen. There we go. I hope you found that useful. It is scary to start with when you're getting into this because it's a very big change. But I hope those 10 tips have really helped put your mind at ease and given you at least a starting point and helped you out in terms of how you're going to attack building websites with the block editor. So yeah, any questions, then let me know. You can follow me on Twitter. I'm WP Mark, tweet about WordPress-y kind of stuff. If you've got any questions, you can ask me on there. Or obviously, you can ask them in the comments down below, and I will do my best to answer them for you. Anyway, that's all from me for now. Thank you for watching, and we will see you again very soon.